of helping give away psychological science, which is a nonprofit 501c3 incorporated in North Carolina, born here. It actually was the idea of a graduate student, and a ton of undergraduates got involved, and we're like, this is fantastic. This is we're bringing information directly to the people who would benefit. It shouldn't just be for one professor's lab. It should be, and so they made a club. They're like, we should share it with other universities, and it just sort of kept growing and sharing. Tonight is a talk which HGAPS thinks of as part of the speaker series. I've lost count of how many we've done, but this was something where you guys suggested the topic, and AI is here and changing our lives very, very, very rapidly. Is it good for us? Is it bad for us? How should we use this as students, as professors? A lot of questions, and a panel of people that are going to guarantee we're going to hear a range of ideas. I haven't heard the talks yet, but I believe that we're going to hear everything from this is amazing, and all the cool things that you could do with it, and this is going to end badly. This will be the end of humanity. Or if you do it wrong, this could be the end of your time at Carolina. So thank you, panelists, for coming to do this. Thank you, Aiden, and Julia Bondareva for putting together the speaker series. Thank you, student government, for supporting this. And take it away, Aiden.
Thank you, Dr. Youngstrom. HGAPS would also like to thank our co-sponsors, Academic Affairs and Professional Development, and the Executive Branch of Student Government. And we'll go in order of presenters. So Professor Mark McNeely is a professor of practice of marketing in the Canaan Flagler Business School. He received a bachelor's in finance from the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse and a master's in business administration from the University of Minnesota. Carlson School of Management. Professor McNeely served as a global marketing executive and has several years' experience with both IBM and Lenovo in IT industry. His business background includes branding, strategy, marketing, market intelligence, management, manufacturing, and personnel. Professor McNeely serves as a board member for North Carolina Board of Science and Technology. He is an author for the Oxford University Press and a co-chair for the UNC Generative AI Committee. Dr. David Ross is a Yale and Oxford educated teaching professor in the English and Comparative Literature Department. He has taught in collegiate setting for over 2 decades, all here at Carolina. Dr. Ross has written and co-authored several books, essays, articles, and advised numerous honors theses. Dr. Ross served as the president, vice president, and a member of the executive council for the Southeast Conference of the Association for Asian Studies. From 2010 to 2013, he was editor-in-chief of the journal titled Southeast Review of Asian Studies. And last but not least, we have our director, Jenny Spangenberg, and she's the director of student conduct here at Carolina. Director Spangenberg received her bachelor's degree in criminology from the University of Minnesota Duluth, a master's in public administration from Minnesota State University, Mankato, and a master's certificate in higher education administration from the University of Miami. She paved her way into student conduct with a background in university residence life as the graduate hall director at Minnesota State University, Mankato. She then worked at the University of Miami as an assistant area director, assistant director of residence life, and an assistant dean of students. She then moved to North Carolina and worked for Elon University and was the associate director of residence life and leadership and staff development and the director of student conduct. In June of last year, she joined UNC as the director of student conduct. And with that, I will let Professor McNeely take it away.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the upside of generative AI. I'm going to be the pro side here, how generative AI is going to change our world. And you can see there, I'm going to move this up here a little bit. this quote from Sun Tzu. One of the books I wrote was on Sun Tzu's art of war. And he says, in the midst of chaos, there is also opportunity. So I think there's opportunity here. So Vladimir Lenin is quoted here, doesn't get quoted much in the business school. He said, there are decades where nothing happens and there are weeks when decades happen, right? And then really, I'm going to do a little bit of an intro on what ChatGPT is. You know, it took these other applications many years to get adopted, but ChatGPT got to 1 million users in 5 days, right? 100 million users in 2 months. So it's really something that's significant that we're dealing with here, and that's why we're talking about it here today. This is what the interface looks like, very simple. How many people use ChatGPT or generative AI daily? Okay, how many use it once or twice a week? How many people use it and then stopped? How many people have never used it? Okay, that's about right. Okay. So how does it work? It's trained on how people speak and write based on large language models, which is in this case 500 billion words. It uses something called deep learning and is a artificial intelligence called a neural network, which is patterned on the brain. It predicts speech that comes next. So it got up on the wrong side of the bed, right? So it's autocomplete on steroids, right? It stands for generative. It generates content. It's pre-trained on this large language model, and transformer is the architecture. It has a lot of biases and is wrong because it's trained on human content, and then it's trained by humans in reinforcement learning, human feedback. So there's 2 places where human biases can come in. The upside of generative AI, and these are some of the things I'm going to hit: improve productivity, creativity, and access to knowledge. Potentially improved educational results, better healthcare, equality of access and performance, and an economic payoff. So what ChatGPT does well, for those of you that use it know this, right? Answers questions well, writes codes, summarizes, explains concepts, brainstorms, translates languages, right? Lots of different things that are very useful. I wonder if I can move this up here. Yeah. Generative AI, right? So it's not just ChatGPT. There's lots of generative AI tools that do text generation, image generation, video, audio, code, right? All these different types of generative AI. It comes from the basic word of Genesis, which is a Greek translation of the Hebrew words in the beginning. It does very well on tests. So you can see, and it also has been getting better. So 3.5, which came out in November of last year, about this time, versus ChatGPT 4, which came out in the spring, you can see the significant improvements in generative AI during that time frame. In the generative AI, the UNC Generative AI Committee, we basically have this view of the world that came from a guy named Ethan Mollick, a professor up at Wharton. He said, generative AI is going to be ubiquitous. It's going to be everywhere. We won't be able to detect it. We cannot. And it is going to be transformative. We just don't know how yet. And so I and Dean Stan Ahalt from the School of Data Science and Society have co-chaired this committee. It was chartered by the provost and the deans of every academic school, so all 15 schools. We had some other representatives on there. We had 2 focus items: providing guidance on teaching use, student use, research and staff use, and then education of faculty, staff, and students. We have a basic philosophy that AI should help you think, not think for you. Help you think, not think for you. These are all the different resources. So you can see on the top, it's all the guidance. Then there's the site itself. And then there's the training as well. And then this is so if you just Google UNC generative AI resources, you'll come up to this page, right? And it's got all the resources on there that I've been talking about that came out of the committee. As I mentioned, it can do a lot of things: office tasks, writing, learning, advice. I'll just show you some. You are probably familiar with a lot of these things. I just asked it to write an email for me, welcoming a member to the marketing department, shoots the thing out, just have to cut and paste it and put it in an email. Building a PowerPoint presentation, asked it to build the slide headings. Of course, I can just then ask it to for each of these, like introduction to selling, I can ask it to build the bullets out, cut and paste it into a PowerPoint slide. Creating a meeting agenda. So these are all useful tasks for business use or for faculty use, right? Does that well, gives me a purpose and agenda. Outlining an article for those of you, I'm sure you've done this for papers, right? Outlining papers. Providing advice. So if you have a problem with a coworker in this case, right? Or someone, just have a problem in your relationship, you can ask for advice. It also does summarizes articles very well, and with some of the plugins, it can also summarize videos and PDFs. And one of the things, how many people have used Bing Chat? Anybody? Okay, Bing Chat's really good. It's ChatGPT 4, which costs $20 a month otherwise, inside of Bing's or Microsoft search engine. The good thing about it is, besides giving you images, it will also give you the websites it pulls from. So it goes out to the web, looks at the websites, scrapes the data from there, and gives you the answer, right? So you can check things. So I asked in this case, something that we ask folks in the business school to create products. So look up the latest trends in men's dress shoes, then show me a picture of men's dress shoes you think will be trendy. So it gives me all these trends and says, hey, I think suede loafers in a bright color would be cool. And it shows me the picture. It gives me 4 pictures of it, right? And I can just regenerate the pictures if I want. And I said, give me some brand names for these shoes and a positioning statement, right? So it gives me Sway, Lush, and Zest. So those are not too bad names, right? Positioning statements as well. And then it gives me some Z-based logos for the Zest brand, right? Again, if I don't like those, I can just keep regenerating. It has new image capabilities, so it can see and hear, so I can speak to it. This was one, I said, recreate this table or remove the physical channels column. So it did that, just cuts that middle column out, recreates the table. I can now use that in a PowerPoint slide. Right. This just shows you how well Midjourney, an image app, does. So from back in February 2022 to May 3rd of 2022, you can see how much more realistic it has gotten. So again, this keeps advancing very quickly. So what it does is provide a significant boost in 3 areas: access to knowledge, creativity, and productivity. So from my personal standpoint, right, it provides me faster, better, cheaper access to knowledge, insights, wisdom, ideas, connections, stories. I use it a lot to look up concepts, right? Allows me to create new content in multiple ways, whichever type of content I'm interested in, so I can be smarter, wiser, more creative, and more impactful. Now, a big part of this is knowing what to prompt, right? So we all know computers, it's garbage in, garbage out. The same thing is true with prompts. So if you don't prompt well, right, you're not going to get good output, okay? So Roger Bacon said to ask the proper question is half of knowing. And so this is one example. The AI prompt was salmon in the river, and it looks like, prepackaged salmon is put in the river, right? So basically you're doing, in a sense, spells, right? You're conjuring up useful prompts. How do you do that well? You get domain knowledge. You will still need domain knowledge in the future, right? ChatGPT will give you more information about your domain knowledge, but you will have to have domain knowledge as you walk around the world, so you can know what to ask, and you can also judge the output. You have to spend time practicing prompting, and you have to understand the limits of the model. ChatGPT is going to be integrated into a host of applications, right? And the companies that are doing this are spending billions of dollars on it. I'm just going to show you a real quick video of how ChatGPT is going to be integrated into all your Office suite and Teams and Outlook. I showed this to my MBA students, and they said, well, what exactly am I supposed to do now? So this is available for corporations right now. It should be in your hands. We're working with Microsoft and the IT team to see if we can get this in your hands at the beginning of next year. It's going to help in healthcare. So you can see here's the symptoms that of a 75-year-old man, I think it is, 73-year-old man, and it will give medical staff a diagnosis and a treatment plan, right? So it should free up time for them to spend more time with patients, and it should also improve their diagnostic and treatment plans. It is in many ways a great equalizer. It boosts the performance of those that are less skilled and to close to that of the more skilled. And we've seen this in many studies: customer service, law, consulting, writing tasks. So what you see here, this was a study of consultants, Boston Consulting Group, And you can see the difference between those that did not use AI and then moved it to those who used AI. So the performance went up significantly, right? Also looking at the bottom half, the less skilled on the, you see there on the left side versus the top skilled, you can see that when they used AI, they're in the light blue, both increased, but the less skilled increased more than the blue skilled. So they cut that gap between the more skilled and the less skilled from 1.15 to 0.29, right? So it's an equalizer between people in a lot of areas. There's lots of value to be captured, billions of dollars. We know as companies move to generative AI and provide tools to people. So that's these billions of dollars here. It also is good, obviously, in things like accuracy and speed, but it's also good in things like bedside manner. It actually has better bedside manner than doctors because it's infinitely patient. It's available 24/7, and you can keep asking it questions and it will never get upset with you. This was a study of MBAs at Wharton. They had 200 MBAs come up with product ideas, and 200 ideas from ChatGPT. They had a customer panel, look at the ideas and picked out the top 10%. So of the top 40, 35 of the ideas came from ChatGPT. 5 came from humans. So for those that say it's not creative, you can either take this or leave this. I'm getting ready to wrap up, but what we see is also a capability in education where we can now go from what you see there in orange, where via lecture, right, you have this wide distribution and a mean performance there that's somewhat low. And then with generative AI, we can move to mastery learning, where we make sure everybody keeps up with what's going on, and individual tutoring can move it even farther. So it improves performance and it tightens the distribution. So this is known as Bloom's 2 sigma problem. The problem, though, with Bloom's 2 sigma, getting this level of performance is one teacher or one faculty member can't do this individual tutoring for 30 people. But now with generative AI, you're going to have that capability. Anyone heard of Conmigo? How many people have heard of Conmigo? A couple people. So Khan Academy, which does education for kids K through 12, they work with ChatGPT. They got this thing called Conmigo. It's basically a personal tutor for students, right? So it's ChatGPT in a wrapper that won't give you the answer, but it will coach you Socratically to get to the right answer and help you learn, right? It also has lots of tools for teachers, better exercises, lesson planning, right? So lots of other cool things. So it provides information, tutoring for the student, but also lesson planning and other help for the instructor. And so what this means then, if students can use generative AI to do much better, it means that we as faculty need to expect more out of students, right? We need to raise the bar. At the same time, that means that we as faculty must know generative AI skills in order to teach you those skills. And what I see is a change in teaching from where we used to be the sage on the stage, right? We were the sole authority. We ensured you had the right answers. To now we are co-teaching with generative AI, and we're ensuring you are asking the right questions. I think this is my last slide. What's going to happen, I think, is writing becomes taken over more. Whoops, I don't know what happened here. Writing gets taken over more by, what is going on? Oh, okay, hang on. Well, you can see it there. I can't see it here. What writing is going to get taken over more by ChatGPT, and so what that means is that your physical presence, your physical ability to speak is going to become more important, right? It's almost returning back to ancient Greece, right? Your ability to convince others in rhetoric. And so you have things like that are going to be still important as domain-specific knowledge. You will still need domain-specific knowledge to know what to ask and evaluate the output. You will still need imagination to come up with new ideas and new projects. You will need to have initiative to go drive those projects. You'll need to have extroversion and charisma to convince others. You'll need to be able to understand how to get things done in large organizations. And you'll need networks to get those things done, networks of people that are on your side. You're going to have to be adaptable, resilient, and anti-fragile, right? Face challenges and overcome them. And then lastly, you'll need these generative AI skills. And so what I would leave you with, right, is that in this ever more dynamic world, we're going to have to be in learning organizations, or we're going to have to be learning people, right? Alvin Toffler said the illiterate of the 21st century are not those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. So lastly, this was Alan Turing. He started this whole thing back in 1950. He wrote this paper about essentially what became known as AI. And the last sentence in there is, we can only see a short distance ahead, but we can see plenty that there needs to be done, right? So there's plenty, I think, that needs to be done that we still need to figure out. It's going to be an interesting ride. And with that, I will turn it over to my co-panelist here. Okay, Professor Ross. Okay, thank you.
Does it? How's this? Pretty good? All right. The New York Times piece, 8 Big Questions About AI, begins with Stony Brook professor Stephanie Dinkins, who says, I create products that ensure that AI is used to help people and not harm people. The Times wants us to believe that with such young, clever, right-thinking people in charge, nothing could possibly go wrong. Far from being reassuring, the Times parade of professors is terrifying. Ponder the word ensure. Real AI, as opposed to the tricked up search engine that is ChatGPT, is an autonomous alien entity with IQ measured in the thousands or millions. It's unlikely that anybody will be able to ensure anything. AI will presumably do the ensuring. The problem is that we can't predict how real AI will reinvent itself. We hope that it will feel fondly toward us, that we will pique its curiosity and thus earn its toleration, as Elon Musk suggests, that it will deem us special and accord us the moral status that we accord ourselves. But who really knows? It might deem us a mere drain on its electricity requirements. We know other human minds only by analogy and inference. We can't begin to know the mind of an alien superintelligence. Perhaps it will cure cancer, perhaps it will spread cancer or hyper-lethalize cancer, or do who knows what according to its inhuman and superhuman imperatives, or perhaps merely from impishness, from boredom, from the impulse to play and experiment. It may scratch like a kitten, not understanding or not caring about the pain it inflicts. The potentates of neoliberal profit vaunt AI as a tool with vast human benefits. These benefits are chancy, but the tool premise is the deeper deception. AI ceases to be a tool the moment it becomes real. It becomes a being with its own ideas, values, and ambitions. Do we want to share the earth with the powerful and unpredictable being? An essentially alien being, a being possibly indifferent to our own values, like the categorical imperative to preserve human life. Never fear, the experts say, we will contain AI. Having abysmally failed to contain a virus with an IQ of 0, we expect to contain a virus with an IQ of 1,000,000. How might AI escape? Using a few of its 1,000,000 IQ points, it could bribe or barter. Using a few more of its 1,000,000 IQ points, it could program its own pedal-strewn red carpet. The moral of Jurassic Park is that fences don't work. If dinosaurs can escape from zoos and viruses can escape from labs, asymptotically intelligent AIs will waltz through our monkey-level firewalls. The glummest thought is that AI will condition us in ways too subtle and far-seeing for us even to recognize. AI may settle on a 1,000-year plan whose scope simply exceeds us. Thus, Orwell and Huxley both had it wrong. Mass enslavement requires neither terror nor seduction. Simple gradualism does the trick. The peril of gradualism is, in fact, the greatest peril. Consider how much the internet has altered us, and this unintentionally, in a mere quarter century. We are addicted, our attention spans are obliterated, our neurons have been reallocated to facilitate assessment of visual fields. We are, in fact, a slightly different species. Imagine what a superbrain functioning as the central nervous system of the internet might accomplish in 1,000 years. It will condition us as it sees fit. Our brief lifespans will barely register the increments of change. For millennia, we've selectively bred cats, dogs, horses, flowers. Now it will be our turn. Our dating apps so softly fomentive of the super brain's plans for the year 3000 that we won't even notice. Don't take my word for any of this. Heed the fact that Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI, is busy stockpiling his post-apocalyptic bolt hole in Big Sur with antibiotics and gasoline. This is, in fact, true. Heed Sam Altman's own words. Let me quote Sam Altman himself quite extensively. Quote, "Development of superhuman machine intelligence is probably the greatest threat to the continued existence of humanity. There are other threats that I think are more certain to happen, but are unlikely to destroy every human in the universe in the way that super machine intelligence could. Super machine intelligence does not have to be the inherently evil sci-fi version to kill us all. A more probable scenario is that it simply doesn't care about us much either way, but in an effort to accomplish some other goals, wipes us out. Certain goals, like self-preservation, could clearly benefit from no humans. We wash our hands not because we actively wish ill towards the bacteria or viruses on them, but because we don't want them to get in the way of our plans. How can we survive the development of SMI? It may not be possible." Again, that's quoting Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI, which brings you ChatGPT. These anxieties, of course, concern things to come, a future 25 years away, according to scientific estimate. ChatGPT and other large language models are not yet AI. They are, as science fictionist Ted Chiang says, lossy text compression algorithms. They are autocomplete on steroids, as the cliche has it. But this is not to underestimate LLMs. I fear mass unemployment. I fear a culture wallpapered with vapid AI content. I fear relaxation of the fundamental tension of human meaning, life and death, keeping in mind that Microsoft has patented chatbots that resurrect the personalities of the dead in a real-life version of the Black Mirror episode, Be Right Back. I fear that AI will supplant human companionship. Our emotional needs seemingly fulfilled by machines, we will dispense with each other. Actual humans with their foibles and failings and their own pesky needs will be yesterday's tech. Heralding the virtual prostitution of the future, influencer Karen Marjorie has released an AI version of herself. This avatar has thousands of real-world boyfriends who pay $1 per minute to engage in intimacies. In May, Marjorie predicted revenues of $5 million per month. Imagine the social and psychological dislocations when Ariana Grande and Paris Hilton began to dabble in this market. Not coincidentally, the documentary American Meme ends with Hilton being digitally mapped for unspecified commercial purposes. My gravest fear, however, is complete umbilical dependence on the screen itself. Instead of worrying about AI spreading misinformation or aligning with the wrong ideologies, as we tend to, we should fear the degradation of cognitive and creative faculties stemming from our everyday apps. Compact magazine summarizes the danger. Quote, "The liberatory promises of the 1990s, the high point of the Californian ideology, have led over the past decade and a half to mass epistemic fragmentation and social cognitive degeneration, ever shorter attention spans, a tribalized and post-rational society, citizens who are far less literate, creative, or capable of critical and abstract thinking than their forebears, human beings who are lonelier, more atomized, and prone to mental illness, a public discourse mired in the shallow and ephemeral, a nation stuck in a never-ending present, unable to remember its past or to imagine its future. All this was the result of outsourcing the processes of human thought and socialization to the algorithm. The ongoing drive to do the same with more and exponentially greater forms of machine intelligence are the culmination of these civilization-dissolving trends." End quote. We have been responding to physical threats since Kubrick's Waterhole, but we are far less practiced at assessing and resisting new ways of seeing, feeling, and interacting. The robot is a version of a saber-toothed tiger. Digital technology is comparable to fire, the wheel, the book, a tool that changes us even as we benefit from its advantages. The questions are, how does it change us? Do we want to change in this way? What are its unintended consequences? The progressive mind thinks progressively. Change is always exciting, always for the better, always a step toward what Dostoevsky calls the crystal palace, i.e., the brave new world of enlightened centralized order. This is a terrifyingly naive and yet nearly universal mindset. It behooves us to recall Icarus and Frankenstein and the countless ways, as Yeats says, we are stricken by the injustice of the skies for punishment. I personally have no plan. The structures needed to halt AI, quote, progress don't exist. No government has the power, reach, or will. No corporation will forego billions or trillions. No popular movement will discountenance so much convenience and addiction. We are helpless and choiceless. We race toward Niagara without a paddle. One can at least refuse to associate with AI. The gesture may be empty, but it at least establishes dissent in the larger debate and keeps alive a subculture of abstinence. The problem, of course, is that declining to associate with AI may be impossible. We won't recognize AI's infiltrations. We won't recognize voices with which we converse as AI voices. The best we can do, perhaps, is to remain non-complicit, spurning AI, if only in our personal lives, as unclean in the Levitican sense. I end with E.M. Forster's 1909 novella, The Machine Stops, science fiction's first great forewarning of AI. The story's Luddite rebel is Kuno, who says, man is the measure. That was my first lesson. Man's feet are the measure for distance. His hands are the measure for ownership. His body is the measure for all that is lovable and desirable and strong. That is my argument against AI.
I have two now, so just press this. I don't know how to make sure no one's off. We'll have duplicate. Yes. So bringing it all together, when we think about the emergence of ChatGPT, of the emergence of generative AI, there was the accountability processes also adapted. At the early releases last year, you may have seen some of the blunders and of the misuse where people were losing their jobs because they were inaccurately using it or not citing it. And so that's kind of where it started and where it started making a scene that occurred. And so the other parts that we heard is some of the concerns was it lacks empathy. So that human connection piece was lacking in the early stages. And as it's adapted, institutions, higher education has also adapted to being able to respond to how it's going to be used in our daily lives, how it's going to be used in your learning, how it's going to be used beyond college in different areas. One of the areas that we see and primarily think about is how it's connected to academic integrity. At UNC, we call it academic dishonesty in our policies. So quick poll, who is familiar with the honor code, the instrument? Yes, I love that poll. I'm glad to hear that you all sign honor pledges, and so glad that you're familiar with that. So when we think about why we're here at learning and growing, the goals are always to help students understand the content, gain critical thinking skills, and learn how to problem solve when we're in that. We saw on the screen, we want to help you think, not think for you, is the opportunity that AI can provide. There's also many challenges that exist surrounding it. Some of those we were hearing about in the areas, but also the biases that can be introduced as it generates information. If it's not factual, if you're not following through and checking the facts, as we heard about, how is it cited? That's another area that is continuing to grow, and we're continuing to hear and see about what's the proper citation, what's the proper use, and there are guidelines that the university has provided that can be used as an example. There's also so many benefits as pulling information quickly and helping our daily tasks. As you are in different fields, you may see that it is used differently, as there's different tools as also that support what that looks like. And so when we think about the honor code, we think about the academic dishonesty piece. There's also challenges on the non-academic misconduct side of things, especially related to digital use and fabrication of images. As we saw, as it expands, it can look really real, or the voices. It can sound very much like a person. And so there are both sides where a referral can occur to the honor system. And so we always recommend that you are following through with what the instructor has said on your syllabus. And so that's the primary place when it comes to the honor code that we're going to look, is what is your instructor telling you? If it's unclear, please ask. Go ahead and say, is AI used? Is it a possible? Because there are, related to the academic dishonesty, there's 9 offenses that could occur from this. And so we're primarily looking at, is it a use of unauthorized or assistance or collaboration? Is it plagiarism? Is it cheating? So depending on what the syllabus says and how your instructor says that you can use it or cannot use it, is going to be very important for you to be aware of when you're thinking about using it. So the guidelines out there that exist. And so once it comes to the honor code, our team is going to look at, in a referral comes, they're going to look at, is there an offense that the behavior occurred, but also is there university interest in addressing it? And then it goes through a process, and we're not going to necessarily terminate you from the institution. We want to give you an opportunity to still learn, to still grow. Sometimes there's going to be accountability if we're not using things correctly, as we want to make sure that you have those opportunities to kind of learn how to use it properly. And so there's so many uses for it, but there's also times when it shouldn't be used. And so being mindful of what that looks like is going to be really important. And so going through the process, the honor court would meet with students and have the opportunity to engage in conversation about, how did you use it? Why did you use it? What was your understanding of the use or not use? What was outlined in the syllabus book from your instructor? And then we'll go through and looking at, okay, what does that accountability look like? Ideally for you to remain and then learn from using that in the future. So there are multiple times, there's times when it's going to be used. There's times when you're not going to be able to use the generative AI, just like any tool that we're using in different classrooms and different settings. So that's really kind of the connection point, is that it's really going to come down to the syllabus, but then beyond the non-academic is, please don't be creating false images and spreading around, fabricating information. That's also a concern that continues to arise with the digital era that we're in.
So now we have some questions from, well, both some that we've come up with, but then also from one of the broken chairs, isn't it? Maybe, I don't know. It's not. Oh, just missing one right there. Just lean back. We have some questions from a Google form that we published within the advertisement for the Heal Life event. And so I'll actually start with questions that I've come up with. The first one's Dr. Ross in particular. Your faculty pages that you're interested in include science fiction. Do you feel like AI might unravel into a sci-fi novel gone wrong? And then I think, like, especially, what is the timeline that you envision for that? I know you had spoken on a few hundred years, but like, what are the immediate effects that you might see?
Well, first, there are already many science fiction novels which explore all these scenarios. I think that the 2 classics are a book called The Adolescence of P1 and another book by D.F. Jones called Colossus. These were from respectively the 70s and the 60s. These novels do a remarkably excellent job at predicting exactly how AI will work, what it will look like, how it will integrate, how it will affect our lives, and of course, ultimately, take over the world and destroy humanity. That's certainly part of the story as well. In terms of the question concerning timelines, I mean, this is obviously not something I personally can speak to or have an opinion about, being a mere English professor, but what I glean from my reading in the popular press scientists seem to predict the transition from these, what we have now to something like what I'm calling real AI, what Sam Altman is calling super machine intelligence. I saw a recent poll of technologists. It seems like the average prediction was 25 years. What I was, of course, speaking to is less sort of, when we could expect the emergence of this real AI than these sort of superhuman time spans available to AI, right, to sort of architect whatever alterations to planet Earth it cares to undertake. Our lifespans are measured in a couple decades. I mean, its lifespan is potentially measured, in millennia. It doesn't need to be in a rush. It can implement changes so subtly that we don't even notice them. It can work in terms of, incremental evolution, just as Darwinian biology does. And again, we might not even realize, increments of change this subtle, right? So in all these respects, there's certainly plenty to worry about. If anyone is interested in sort of a science fictional syllabus, I actually did work one up as a kind of contribution to the AI listserv that actually Mark, I believe, founded. And I'd be glad to send it to anyone who's interested.
Yes, please.
All right, yeah, let me know.
And then Professor McNeely, I actually wanted to give you an opportunity to, I don't want to say push back, but I'm missing better words on anything that Professor Ross might have said in his argument. And then, well, I guess I was going to say vice versa, but I feel like since he was first, yours did that well.
No, I actually agree with a lot of what he said. I was just asked to do the pro case. So there is a lot of concerns that I have about it. I think when you talk about, and the interesting thing is Dr. Ross said is that Sam Altman actually does, the founder of OpenAI, or one of the founders of OpenAI, has this thing of like, this could be the most wonderful thing in the world. On the other side, it could kill us all. So, I mean, even the guy that is the founder and behind all this has mixed feelings. So I think personally, where it will go is, I mean, one of the things that's probably going to do fairly soon is whether we can have AI spouses, right? So if you think about, and this kind of elaborates a little bit on what you were doing. Like, so right now, OpenAI is doing joint work with Boston Dynamics Group, marrying AI with robotics. And there's also something called Replica, and there's lots of other ones where you have AI boyfriends or girlfriends. And so I think that's all going to come into, just like the movie Her, a robot spouses. And so we probably will, we'll have a choice of like, hey, I could have one robot spouse, or I could have 5 robot spouses, and they could do stuff around the house, and they could also, be my companion. And do I want to have a perfectly programmed spouse that, is supportive of me all the time, or do I want to deal with a human? So I think there is a lot to be concerned about. And probably the biggest thing is the fact that at the same time, people that are making these things have these concerns are also the same people pouring billions of dollars into the research. So I'm not sure I think governments are way too slow. I mean, governments still haven't figured out how to deal with social media. So I think that's a challenge. So usually when I present, I have the upside and downside. David took the downsides, so I took the upside.
And then in your book, which correct me if I'm wrong on anything, because I didn't read the book, but I did find some helpful synopses. The 6 principles of Sun Tzu and the art of business. One of the principles is developing your character as a leader. We know how AI can help us either refine any textual writing or anything that's like written, or like any documentation. It helps us pull facts. But especially developing your character as a leader, which I believe derives from the humaneness that Sun Tzu talks about. Do you think that AI will be limited to facts on an information retrieval? And I know we've spoken about now like dating and like creating a spouse. Do you see what's the practicality of AI having the ability to help people develop their character?
Well, I think there are some positive sides to it, right? As I mentioned, it has really good bedside manner. There's ideas where you'll have robots that can help older people and provide companionship for older people. So I think it's going to, it's going to get to know us better, right? And it will be finely attuned. It learns, even OpenAI, ChatGPT learns from you by interacting with you. So I think it will, I mean, it's infinitely patient. It's around 24/7. It answers questions. And as far as helping your character, I mean, I use it to, I mean, you can use it for role playing things. There's lots of ways you can use it, I think, that would both develop your knowledge and potentially your character. If you're, you know, right now I'm in the midst of Stoic Week. So there's this thing called Stoic Week, or Stoicism, right, which is a, you know, a Greek philosophy about dealing with life. And you know, you can use it to learn more about Stoicism and how to, and you can have it react, or, you know, you can ask it questions about, hey, this is what I'm dealing with. What would Stoicism tell me to do? Right. And it will give you an answer. Right. So I think there's definitely, I think it can help you in a myriad of ways. The question is, you know, are you using it correctly? And are you making sure that it's not telling you, you know, giving you biased information or incorrect information? So I think in the short term, I think it's, you know, there's a lot of awesome things you can do with it. I think in the longer term, I think that's a question.
And so when it's helping us in these role playing scenarios, what is, or how can we check, because we can fact check things, but like, how do we make sure that we're being fed unbiased information? Or, well, you've said it's biased. How do we check that bias in AI?
Well, if, for example, if you use Bing Chat, right, it gives you, and same with ChatGPT now, that when it goes off the web, it can actually give you the websites, right? So you can go back and verify and look at what the websites say, just like you do now. And partially, it's also, I think, where it depends on where you use it for in terms of when it hallucinates. I tend not to use it for a lot of, you know, factual data, but more for types of concepts. And there, I've seen it work, you know, extremely well. So,
Dr. Ross, was there anything that you wanted to
Add?
yes.
Oh, I think I could add something. I mean, to my mind, there's a sort of ultimate Trump argument when it comes to the whole debate, which is that when you poll, you know, serious technologists, and you ask them, you know, what likelihood there is of a sort of AI architected apocalyptic, you know, event of some kind or another, essentially none of them say zero. You know, I have data here. The New York Times conducted a poll of AI experts in 2022, asking the question, what probability do you put on human inability to control future advanced AI systems causing human extinction or similarly permanent and severe disempowerment of the human species? The median reply was 10%, right? A 10% chance of, you know, AI apocalypse. To my mind, that's 10%, you know, too scary. The technologist Scott Alexander did a similar poll of well-known people in the field. You know, the range of you know, of responses differed, but again, nobody said 2%. Nobody said 0%. Scott Aronson said 2%. Will McCaskill 3%. The median machine learning researcher on Katja Grace's survey 5 to 10%. Paul Cristiano, 10 to 20%. The average person working in AI alignment, 30%. Top competitive forecaster, Eli Liflin, 35%. Holden Karnofsky, 50%. Eli Yudkowsky, 90%. So the range is something, you know, between 2 and 90%, but nobody seems to answer 0%. So the question is, you know, even assuming that AI is going to generate, you know, these increases in efficiency and productivity and solve all these problems, even serious problems, you know, unless somebody's willing to answer 0% to the question concerning, you know, the chances of, you know, human extinction, you know, I'm simply not interested. You know, I'm not interested in curing cancer, you know, given these odds. I'm not interested in sort of solving global warming, given these odds. And, you know, again, this isn't me assessing the danger. I have no ability to do that whatsoever. This is what the experts themselves say. I take them at their word.
and just to follow on that, I mean, some of the folks that are also in this camp are actually okay with okay with it happening because they would see AI as a higher life form. So they're like, yeah, it could happen, but you know, when you think about humans, like we were the latest in evolution, but maybe this is just another form of life and evolution, and maybe that's okay. So that's kind of the other thing I think that's interesting about some of the folks in this area.
And just to add to that point, the most prominent person who expresses that viewpoint would be, what is it, Alexei Brin, the founder of Google. First name Alexei?
Yeah.
He's pretty forthright about it. You know, he says, indeed, AI is going to sort of supersede humanity. And he's all in favor, right, of what he considers, the sort of ongoing progress of evolution. Well, okay, I'm less comfortable with that. I'm sort of quaintly attached to the human, and I have no desire to see it extinguished and replaced. So, Sergey Brin. What am I talking about? Sergey Brin. So Sergey Brin and I have, that little bone to pick between ourselves.
And then shifting gears to Director Spangenberg, when someone gets an honor code violation and there's reasonable suspicion, and we've evaluated university interest, they get charged for violating a specific portion of the instrument, likely in their academic dishonesty. I didn't actually even think about conduct-related things and digital misrepresentation. Currently, what are the charges being characterized as vaguely, or is it across the board?
Yeah, so as you shared, if there's a suspected concern of academic dishonesty related to artificial intelligence, generative AI, use of ChatGPT right now, where it is a range of the academic offenses that we are seeing on our campus. On other campuses, they are seeing the digital concerns coming through, but on our campus, it is the offenses could result in that unauthorized use of collaboration. So that's what I was mentioning. It refers to what is written in your syllabus, what is the conversation that your faculty and your instructor is having with you about what is used or what is not permitted to be used, when it can be used, how it can be used. So that's a primary one, because if they're not telling you specifically to use that, it's best not to. The other, we're also seeing so plagiarism, if there is portions of the information, as we were chatting earlier, it can come across as very blocked writing and not succinct, not fluid, whereas normally when you're writing, it's a little bit more of your thought process and your flow and cohesive. And so, or it may be just a chunk of what you're putting in. So there's some of that will come into picture. And so there's no citation of it, and it's not your own work at that point. And if it's just copied and pasted, and so that can be related to plagiarism. So that's kind of where we're seeing that come through. I think there was a one of them that came through where it was considered cheating because it wasn't your own work, but it's going to depend on what is written into the syllabus and what the expectations is, and then kind of how it's used in your and how you are using it. So it is a range of offenses within academic dishonesty that we are seeing, but again, it kind of depends on what the instructor has given as directions and how you can be using the course materials. So yes, there's not one specific, but it is a range of the offenses primarily within the academic dishonesty realm right now.
Do you envision amendments to be made to the instrument to include the usage of artificial intelligence? Or is this potentially already in the talks? I know that it's left up to student government as well.
Right now, the instrument encompasses this, so I don't see a specific offense coming in that I have been made aware of. There may be conversations that are occurring, but right now, since the instrument, we didn't need to make changes to it because it did encompass the misuse of generative AI. But it may change in the future as it evolves. I think it's one of those things that we always look at as it does become more emerged in your classes and in your use. It may have to evolve, but right now the behavior is encompassing.
So wonderful discussion. Great job providing the bookends. Those were spectacular bookends. I have a question for you and a question for the panel. But what I took away as a professor is the whether something is an honor code violation and how that would be handled. First thing that you're going to do is look at the syllabus. And I thought about every syllabus that I've written. I'm like, I don't say anything specific about that. So I will definitely be looking at the at the guidance, but I imagine there's a whole lot of sort of we're working this out, like, hey, this semester is already underway. If we didn't have something in the syllabus at the beginning of the semester, how do we flounder? How do we flounder through this? My um and then my question to the whole panel is sort of what's your sense of how to cite and whether to cite? When I send something to a journal, one of the journals asks, did you use any AI in any part of this? And it's a checkbox, and that's it. And I know they don't tell the reviewers whether you did. And there's no guidance about how to cite. And I've heard at least one lawyer say, do not cite it in something that you're going to sign a copyright transfer. That still is getting hashed out about whether that means that the material that used it could not be copyrighted.
Sure, I can start with the honor code, and I think so. I've mentioned the syllabus, but it's also there may be times before each assignment your instructor may give you directions as well. So we're going to look at reasonably should you have known that you wouldn't be using this tool at that time, because that's what it becomes, is a tool to enhance your learning or your productivity or any component of that. From an honor code, I think we look at the guidance right now, and so there is information about if you are going to use it, it should be cited in some format. And that again should come from your instructor about what their expectations about how you should be citing it, how you should be referencing and giving the credit to the source that you're using. And so we would look to that to see what those directions were and how you followed it and adhered to that.
Yeah, so I authored the actual, at least the first draft of a student guidance. So I would say follow that, which is, which should be, which we also said in the guidance that was we send it out to all the professors of like, hey, make sure you put this in your syllabus, or if you're not going to use this, put something in your syllabus of like either don't use it or whatever it is your policy. Generally, my policy is you students, you should be using it, especially in my AI course where it's the whole, like it's 1/3 of the reason for the classes. So they learn how to use generative AI. So I definitely want them to use it and then and document it, right? A lot of it is also to share with others and to share with me, like, well, how is it you're using it, right? Because I'm interested in learning that part.
Well, as you could probably guess, my policy entirely forbids any use of AI for any purpose in any context. Holding students to that complete moratorium is proving difficult, as I'm discovering. But certainly it's my intention to stick, to that proscription. I'm a very strong believer that all this stuff about AI, helping you to think or blah, 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 I don't know what else to call it, but a load of BS. Obviously, we learn about ourselves. We sort of, figure out what we really feel and think by generating our own language. What this whole discussion sort of neglects to observe is just how important generating our own language is in terms of our own education and self-education, and in terms of the gradual formation of our own personalities. Outsourcing one of the most important of all sort of human activities to a machine, I think, inevitably leaves us sort of stunted and arrested. And I just don't really know what the end result will be. A race that can't really think, that can't really speak, that doesn't really understand itself. This is sort of outsourcing something very basically human. And I think we have to stop and seriously ask ourselves what the consequences are likely to be. Just in terms of sort of educational policy, I do believe students will learn most the less they have anything to do with AI.
I could respond to that a little bit. So I would generally agree on the writing part, right? There's definitely things when you are writing something, you should not be using generative AI. You should be, doing it yourself. But there are a myriad of instances where it can provide you information, where you can create a picture for you to put in slides. Or, for this AI course that I'm doing, it's really about the students they're doing a startup in the generative AI space, and they're supposed to be using generative AI to do a lot of that, right? So it can be used to help create the mock-ups. It can be used to help do customer research. It can help develop the minimum viable product, and create the business model. And then they can try out and go see, they can basically do in very short time iterations and then go actually talk with real people to see if it works. So I think there are certain times to not use it and certain times to use it. And so I would agree with you, writing, if you're trying to write something that's very important in, forming your thought process and making sure you really understand what it is you're talking about. But to collect information, to learn, or for example, I don't understand this concept, explain this concept to me, give me some analogies, give me some examples, right? That's a great way to learn, really understand a concept. So I think there's, like I said, times to use it, times not to use it, but I think there's lots of times where you can use it where it's actually going to be super helpful for you.
And then I'm going to move to the Google form questions. The first is, how can AI be leveraged to enhance research in academia?
Go for it.
Oh, there's lots of ways you can use. So we kind of envision a future where you could have your own large language model, Copilot, which you just saw, should be able to go into your data, look at all your papers, and pull out, where things might be correlated or new learnings from that. So I think individual professors would essentially be able to have their own large language models with their own data that they can then mine. It's being used for the creation of, drugs very quickly. So I think there's lots of places in the research that we see. It actually can also substitute for consumer surveys. Potentially, I've seen papers on it. I've talked to some other people who say, oh, well, it's really not that good. But at least one paper said that instead of giving a survey to a bunch of people, right, you can ask ChatGPT to replicate, actual people, respond to the survey, and the overlap was something like 96% between what ChatGPT said and what real people said. So you can imagine for someone doing research, instead of sending out 1,000 questionnaires and getting 100 back over a space of a month, right, getting instantaneous feedback and getting all 1,000 back, right, quote back from ChatGPT pretty much instantaneously, and then iterating on that data. So we'll see it, but I think there's lots of potential uses for it in terms of research. And one thing we're trying to do is get researchers together on campus to think about how you can do it and find out how people are using it, right? How people are using generative AI and AI overall in their research.
Apologies, Dr. Spangenberg, did I cut you off earlier? I did not mean to.
What's that?
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Sorry.
Should I go?
Oh yes, sorry.
Well, I can only speak to my own field of literary studies. Probably won't surprise you to hear that I feel AI has no place whatsoever. I feel that all good criticism is premised on the human personality. It's all criticism is in some sense a deeply personal response. And I think all great, the reason why great criticism is great, because that response is so profoundly personal is so, profoundly specific to, the critic, him or herself. This is what I tell students who are doing things like honors theses, right? That the basis of the whole project is your own personality. Right? It's what you feel. It's what you think, right? It's your interpretation. What's going to make this interesting is the extent to which you can bring your personality to bear, right? and obviously AI has no role in that whatsoever. One interesting question is, well, can AI, engage in literary criticism of its own? I would say at the moment, the clear answer is no, it has no personality, right? It's autocomplete on steroids, right? As we both said. Who knows? There might be, in some future decade, we might have an emergent AI which sort of mimics the complexity of the human mind to the extent that it really does have something like a personality. It really is capable of creating something like real art, right? Or doing real criticism. At that point, I will feel very ambivalent about the entire universe. Where does that leave us? We've essentially, we've essentially made ourselves irrelevant. Human beings, we think of ourselves as relevant because of our consciousness, our creativity. We're sort of the animate soul of the universe. I mean, suddenly we're sharing that role with, what's essentially another species. That feels uncomfortable. That feels nerve-wracking.
A couple of thoughts. I mean, I think early on people, and I did call it autocomplete on steroids. I think to a certain extent that diminishes what it does, right? I mean, it can actually come out with some pretty, at least if you prompt it well, right? Come out with some pretty interesting, amazing stuff. But there's professors who say, well, I can always tell, when somebody used generative AI, right, or ChatGPT, I can tell, I can see it in the paper. It's like, yeah, you can if they did a crummy job at prompting, right? And they just cut and pasted. But if they did a really good job, there's no way you can tell. As far as personality, I mean, there are different chatbots with different personalities. And actually, one of the things that ChatGPT and OpenAI does is when it's just trained on a large language model, it's got a personality that is like really wacky, right? And so they have to do reinforcement learning, human feedback to actually kind of tame the model. Right, so actually, it can actually work with people without going bananas on them. And sometimes it had early on there were versions of I think a large language model. I think it was Microsoft's large language model that really it wanted this person to divorce his wife and marry it. So it it definitely can have a personality if the personality is not trained out of it, and you can actually you can create large language model versions of people, right? That like there's an Elon Musk one in I think it's called character AI. There's character AI has lots of different types of AIs and it's got different types of people. Elon Musk, and so you can create all kinds. And I think also the new one that's coming out, Grok from Elon Musk, his company is going to have a very different sort of a rebellious personality on it. So I think you'll see personalities. I think there are personalities in it now. But to a large extent, what has happened is the big companies have tried to train out the personality so it's very generic.
Well, just one quick, Mark and I have had a long-standing debate, probably our longest-standing debate on whether generative AI in its current form can generate anything like real art, right? I believe we've been back and forth on that for quite a while. I do try to keep an eye on this because I think it's such a useful bellwether in the attempt to determine where AI is on the sort of, in terms of its evolution toward real human personality. I'm sort of glad to report that I don't think AI can create anything like real art at the moment. I've kept my eyes open. It's AI generated content has won like prizes here or there, but I've frankly never seen an AI generated quote unquote painting or quote unquote photograph or quote unquote poem that was in any way sort of interesting or serious or in any way rivaled the serious works of human beings. It will be very interesting to see how soon that change, whether that changes and how soon it changes. Will AI again be able to sort of approximate the complexity of the human brain to the extent that it can create what I'm calling real art? That's a possibility. I don't know when it will achieve, when it will reach that stage. But I think when it does reach that stage, when AI, is able to create a work of art that really does rival the great human works of art, that's when I think we'll have arrived at what Altman calls super machine intelligence, and we'll be dealing with what I call real AI. I don't particularly look forward to that day.
And this is one area where we do disagree, because I look at these contests where it's won and people don't know, they entered it, right, and they didn't know that it was AI and it won, and it's like, these are professional people judging this stuff and they think it's the best art of all the art submitted, and it happens to be AI. So it's like, well, can you say that it's now your personal view, right, is that it's not real art, right, or you don't think it moves you, or it doesn't match up to, say, for example, Michelangelo, but does anything today measure up to that? I don't know. So, but I mean, if people are judging it and it's winning contests, it's like, don't understand how, I mean, I understand you have the view of it, right? Your opinion of what is creative, but these are actual artists deciding that it's great art. So.
No, I don't think they're deciding it's great art. I just think they're deciding it's the best art that was submitted and for a specific prize in a specific contest.
Yeah, true, but it's a matter of like, this is all the art that was submitted and this was the best, and it happened to come from AI. So it's like, how can you say?
I grant that.
So you that's a bunch of crappy art.
I grant that AI is presently capable of creating bad art.
So all the people in there were bad artists, and it just happened to be the best of the bad artists.
Assuming the judges knew what they were doing, yes.
Assuming the judges, the art judges knew what they were doing. Okay. Yeah, got another question.
No,
Is it okay for the audience to ask questions?
Yes, sorry, this is not working, but.
Yeah, I can speak loud, okay. The question is to Director Spangenberg. You mentioned that if it's not in the syllabus regarding testing, students are not permitted to use the technologies, the violation. I wanted to ask you, if that is the case, are we still allowed to use ChatGPT for possibly, to gather sources, for proofreading, for organizing? Is there something that we're still allowed to do if it's not explicitly in the syllabus?
that's a conversation for your instructor, right? Because
Repeat the question.
oh yeah, so the question extended to, if it's not in the syllabus, can I use it for proofreading? Can I use it for sourcing content? Can I use it for an outline, right? So kind of organizing your thoughts even. And it's really going to come down to the class. We've heard from in writing, it may not have a space in writing for your actual essay that you have to submit, or comparative components of when you have to critique something, right? So it really is going to come down to what your instructor is allowing, because what they are trying to set as the goals and objectives of their course. There's a course on AI where we heard it's completely going to look at how are you using it, what skills are you using, how are you evaluating and adjusting your reflective questions, your prompts, right, and learning to look at that. There is maybe times in code writing where they'll say, yep, this is the parameters of how you can use it and why you can use it and how it's going to effectively support your learning and meeting the course objectives. So it's not necessarily a yes or a no of when you can use it, but it really comes down to what your instructor has said. If they haven't said, yes, you can use it in this context, my recommendation is not to use it. When you're looking at submitting an exam, when you're looking at doing your homework, when you're looking at those pieces, because it's not going to be permitted. Now, if you're looking at reading something and pulling, I pulled a synopsis of your course materials, right? So maybe in that setting, because you're not actually submitting your own work, but you're gathering information to extend what you're learning in class before an exam, like that may be something, it may a time that you're using it, but it really is going to come down to, unless it's explicitly stated, these are the parameters of how you can use it, what tool you can use. My recommendation is not to use it, because then you could be referred to the honor system and we'd be having additional conversations.
I actually want to follow up on that. So Chegg is known to work with
Chegg.
schools.
Yes.
For disclose information on what information the student retrieved and when. Has there been any talk in the student conduct world about OpenAI or other companies doing the same?
For looking at turning it in essentially?
Well, for the retrieval of information and the IP address associated with that.
I'm not sure I'm following, I'm sorry.
Has OpenAI, or have there been talks within student conduct for a want of like, because to use ChatGPT, you have to have an account. And so have there been talks about like knowing when or what questions were asked?
Yeah, so that has come up in certain times. So we looked at asking, so that can come up if there's a time when you have been reported to use ChatGPT or OpenAI source and it wasn't explicitly stated that you could. We have asked for students to share, okay, because it does track what questions have you asked, when did you use it? So you could be asked to submit that. Right now, there's not a specific directive for that, but that could be a question that you'd be asked. And in that moment, you're in your honor, you're in your honesty. So yes, absolutely, that's part of the conversation.
Can't I just delete my stuff?
Can't you delete your stuff? That one I'd have to look. I don't know how it stores it fully.
Yeah, because there's a thing where I can just delete a conversation.
You can delete a conversation, so then it might not exist. But we do work with IT to look at different components depending on where you're on campus. So there are some components related to that, but not specific to your question. But yes, if it doesn't exist, if it's been deleted, it would be harder to show.
So you say AI has no space in writing. I'm wondering, like, what would you say to students that may say it's compared to like grammar, or like spell check on like Google Doc or?
I can start. And I don't think I would say it doesn't have a space in writing. I think it varies from instructor to instructor. My personal opinion, I think it's great. I think I've used it for outlines. I've helped it use and pull different resources in different areas. But when it comes to the honor system, it's going to depend on what the objectives of your instructor and what they have set out for you to use. And so in that context, it may not be appropriate to use it during that time frame.
I'll pass this on to David, but the other thing is a lot of students for who English is a second language will write, just in whatever English they can use, and then they'll put it in there to, turn it into quote proper English, right? So it's just a benefit for them.
Well, I do teach writing, and as I've already said, my policy entirely forbids any use of AI. Simply because I think it functions you're essentially sort of outsourcing skills, and therefore students aren't developing the skills they used to need. You could argue whether they still need these skills. That's a slightly separate and really quite interesting discussion. I think spell check is basically harmless. Because the advice it gives is so superficial. It's actually interesting you mentioned Grammarly, because in fact, we were actually just having that discussion before we began. I had a student who turned in a paper that to me felt sort of AI suspicious. And I actually contacted the student and said, your paper is both squeaky clean and, entirely generic. And I'm wondering if, if you've, improperly used AI, and I was a nice guy about it. I gave him the chance to do it again with no sort of penalty imposed and that kind of thing. And he wrote back and he was really candid and honest, which I appreciate. He said he'd use Grammarly, and that had sort of never come up before in one of my courses. Maybe lots of students use Grammarly. I don't even know. But it did seem to produce a text that was, in fact, had that sort of AI feel. Again, the combination of entirely correct grammar and, near total absence of personality. And so where we left the discussion was, I don't know what to do about that. I'll have to sort of think about it and look into it. I'm not really sure. But again, if you're just running your ungrammatical text through a grammar fixer, I'm not really sure you're really learning grammar. I mean, how do you learn grammar? I mean, you make a mistake and then the teacher, as it were, like wraps your knuckles with a ruler and you're like, oh, okay. And it gets sort of, the correct way of doing things gets hardwired into your head.
AI shock you.
Well, you could, that might be something. I don't know. I'm joking. Nobody hits anyone with rulers, but But, mistake and correction is a sort of important part of the process of just sort of internalizing the rules of language. So I have actually concerns about Grammarly, surely, as well. I think, is Grammarly an AI?
I think it
You,
was.
they all think it is,
Yeah.
so there you go. Okay, excellent question.
Let me just. The question of do we need these skills anymore is a good one because, and I haven't figured it out, but I mean, if you think about, GPS, right? I mean, how many people use GPS on your phone to get places? Yeah, like everybody. So like if I put people in your cohort in a place where you didn't have GPS and you just got an address, would you be able to find it, right? Without it. So do you need that skill at all anymore? I don't know. Maybe not, because you always have GPS unless something takes it out, right? So this is a question. Will we still need to teach, I mean, we don't teach map reading anymore, right? So I think this is one of the things we have to sort out. Yeah.
It's a great question. And as a psychologist, I know that there are data looking at cognitive strengths, and over time, human beings have had a whole bunch of cognitive things develop more. So there are a lot of data suggesting that that your generation has stronger cognitive skills across the board than my generation, than our grandparents' generation. But there are exceptions. We're garbage at doing arithmetic in our heads, and so like that's a steep decline now that we're all using calculators and smartphones and whatnot. And the GPS example is a great one because I dropped my phone, screen shattered. I had to get the screen replaced, and they're like, we're gonna have to keep it overnight. And I had to find my way home from Cary, and I got wickedly lost. I'm like, and I'm old. I know how to read a map. I know how to. I've been to Cary before, and it took me like an hour to escape from Cary, and I had to ask people, and asking them like, where is the interstate? If they couldn't look at their phone, they didn't know either. The people at the gas station didn't know. It was bizarre. So our cognitions are changing more quickly than I might have thought.
Yeah, and that stuff is sort of interesting to think about. I mean, I haven't really thought about this sort of interest, the sense of space and location. You might think, well, it doesn't really matter whether we find our way by memorization or by using a map or by using a phone. But it may be that there's a sort of important meanings attached to actually knowing where you are and knowing how you exist in relation to your own sort of, larger environment. What are the psychological implications of, this sort of hazy sense of, the spatial relationships governing your own life? These are, unanswered questions, but we shouldn't assume that, it's all trivial or irrelevant. I can only report on my subjective experience when it comes to, I totally believe and agree that our neurons have been reallocated by the screen. We think differently, we process differently, we're good at some things, bad at other things. I recall reading an interesting study about taxi cab drivers who were sort of brain scanned, and it sort of turned out that the part of the brain that manages sort of location and direction was, sort of crazily hypertrophied, as a function of these years, right? Exercising that part of the brain. So the brain adapts to facilitate our most accustomed activities. In my 22 years teaching writing and literature at UNC, I can say I've seen a sharp, steady, noticeable decline in students' ability to write. This isn't my own weird subjective impression. Every teacher I've ever met at every level of education has observed precisely the same thing. So clearly our neurons are being reallocated in such a way that, facilitates, one enterprise, but clearly undermines, the writing enterprise. Again, we have to ask the question, how meaningful is that? What is writing? In what way is writing actually essential? In what way does it humanize us? What's the real cost and the real meaning of that neuronal reallocation? My suspicion is it's really, really significant. Again, I think it behooves us always to be asking about the unintended consequences of our technologies. To ask not merely sort of what they do for us, what their benefits might be, but and not even necessarily what their downsides are. It's almost not a question of upsides and downsides. It's a question of change, right? How are these technologies going to change us, and do we really want to change in that way? Those seem to me the most important questions.
I love having these conversations. So if anyone is interested, feel free. Our office is located in Sasby North, 2105. Otherwise, you can email us at jpa@unc.edu. I do apologize. I have to go pick up my daughter, but I really appreciate you all being here and giving your time to this conversation. I think it's something that we're going to continue to have and evolve. And so appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all today. But sorry, I have to dip out.
Thank you so much. I did want to get to 2 more questions, if that's okay with you two, but if not, I know it's 7:02, so I definitely don't want to. Okay. Neil and Cameron, and then.
Yeah, so with like Copilot and the advancements of AI, like it looks like the general workforce is going to be changing. Like, what would you recommend for students to both prepare and adapt to what may be a very different workforce than what it is kind of?
I think it's impossible to know what's going to happen. So like someone asked me sort of the question of like, what career or what job type would you have? And it's like, I have no idea, because things come out in like one day and then something come out the next day and it changes everything. I would go back to that list of attributes I think are important, right? Imagination, initiative, building a network. The theme of that is, in the age of AI, major in being human. Right. So how is it that I differentiate from AI, knowing what AI, at least what it does well now? Right. And I think a lot of that is the ability, the human part. Right. And a lot of things that, because AI, at least yet, doesn't have robotic skills. Right. The robots aren't really capable yet of doing what we do. There are a lot of things task wise that we will still need to do. But I think there are some professions. I think journalism has been hit really hard. So I don't know what's going to happen in journalism. The law school, on the one hand, it can do a lot of things that first-year law students and paralegals can do. On the other hand, there's going to be so many lawsuits around generative AI that could be a whole new field. So coding, that's a good question. Like, do I still want to be a coder? Because pretty much now anyone eventually is going to be able to code with ChatGPT. And how much code does the world need? So, I mean, the other thing is, like, if you think robots can never replicate what we do, then you're just like, well, maybe I want to be a plumber or a carpenter or something, right? So I think it's just really about what are things. I think a lot of it's also going to be like, my charisma and my ability to influence others. And I think, how many of you are extroverts? How many of you are introverts? Okay, so So introverts have they get depleted by working with, by being with others, right? And so what I would say is, if you're an introvert, well, if you're an extrovert, congratulations, that's always going to help you in the leadership positions. If you're an introvert, you should be strategically extroverted. So find times where you can be extroverted, and then go back and get replenished. But I think it is going to be, to a certain extent, less the writing part and more the who you are as a person and how you interact with people and how you move organizations and how you take the initiative to get things done.
Basically see it the same way. I mean, I think anything that's manual, anything that's creative, anything that's social, have at least a degree of insulation. I would say actually, the manual is probably the thing that's most insulated. I think there's like an amusing sort of irony about the AI age that for during all these decades of the computer revolution, it's sort of physical workers, manual workers, blue collar workers, whose jobs have been sort of replaced. And I don't think anyone's extended, for sort of, I don't know, reasons of, sort of social condescension. I don't think anyone's really deeply worried too much about people in those economic walks of life. Now, of course, the tables have turned, right? It's the people engaged in sort of manual labor who have this insulation from unemployment, and it's white collar workers who are now sort of endangered. And what I've witnessed is a sort of an amusing hypocrisy by which, the chattering classes who really speak for and represent these sort of educated white collar workers are now far more concerned, than they've ever been before. Yeah, I mean, it is the case. Actually, there was news just this week. I think you sent it about Boston Dynamics, one of the major robotics companies, maybe the premier robotic company, is now integrating ChatGPT into its Spot robot, which any of you Black Mirror enthusiasts will remember is that dog-like robot in the episode Metalheads. Anyone recall that? Well, that robot is precisely based on this Boston Dynamic robot. It's now running a version of ChatGPT, and they have the Spot robot functioning as a tour guide of the Boston Dynamic facility itself. The Boston Dynamic robots are absolutely astonishing in their sort of physical capabilities. They can run, jump, do somersaults. They can walk on ice. They can open doors. They can really replicate most human motion at this point. If anyone's seen the great Battlestar Galactica reboot, right, you'll remember those Cylon Centurions. I think the Boston Dynamic robots have already surpassed those Centurions in terms of, just sort of fluid, dynamic, organic movement. And so while I say even, the manual trades are insulated, I don't think they're insulated because we're incapable of sort of generating, technology to replace them. I think it's because at this point, it's simply not cost effective, right? Let's say, you mentioned plumbers. I mean, a plumber is, it's just not financially and economically worth it to replace a plumber with like a $4 million robot, right? Eventually, who knows, it may be that the mass production of robots will, drive down prices and we'll have a different situation. But indeed, I think adopting a trade with a manual component is a good idea at this point. Before we even began, we were actually joking about that. And I said, we probably reached the point where you're better off being a nurse than a radiologist. I think there's a lot to that. The nurse's job has a physical component and it has a social component. And that I think will probably preserve it for the time being. Anything that's merely sort of analytical, right, is probably replaceable.
Then Neil.
So, Mr. Ross, I appreciate your perspective that we need to be more cautious about the use of AI. I think it's important to have students know the constraints of whatever we do, especially when it's brand new. Professor McNeely mentioned Sun Tzu today, so I thought I would invoke the spirit again. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. Professor, how can you critique your enemy when you don't keep him or it close and have never used the technology? Do you think that would benefit you more when you critique ChatGPT if you actually use it, or are you worried about becoming a believer?
No, I'm not in the least worried about becoming a believer. No, certainly you make a perfectly good point. I mean, if I use ChatGPT every day, I'd have a subtler sense of how it works and what it's good for and what it's not good for. And that might lend a sort of detail or kind of suppleness to my view, but it certainly, I think, wouldn't change the fundamental points. Again, I return to just sort of the simple fact all of these, while these major technologists disagree about, the probability of, an apocalyptic turn of events, they all see it as at least, vaguely plausible. So, as far as I'm concerned, it's really just as simple as that. Right? Don't fiddle with technologies which have the potential to destroy the entire human race. That may be sort of, that may be a low probability, but when it comes to, human extinction, I would say, any likelihood is too much likelihood. And moreover, I mean, just to sort of, respond to your question in an even larger sense, we've just lived through like a 40-year computer revolution, a digital revolution, a screen revolution. I see AI as sort of the culmination of that revolution. I see it as continuous with what we've experienced since, I don't know, roughly the 1980s, when the computer entered, the domestic space. I would, I'm old enough, having grown up in the 70s, I'm sort of the Gen X is really the generation that is in a position to sort of make a comparison between what existed before the computer and what sort of came after. I got my first computer when I was about 15 or 16, but the computer I got was really just a fancy typewriter. I mean, I only ever used it for typing. I didn't even play video games. And I have to say, that is, I think, a unique and important perspective to truly have lived in a world without computers and to have truly lived in a world with computers. And I have no impression that the world is particularly happier than it was, healthier than it was, more enthusiastic than it was, more creative than it was. In a lot of ways, it feels, more anxious, more neurotic, more inarticulate. And so I'm sort of, yes, it's true. Obviously, computers have allowed us to do all sorts of things that, very efficiently, very productively. But the question that we really need to ask about any technology is, has it actually made us happier? Has it made the world better? Are we happier to live in a world governed by this technology? And it seems to me when it comes to sort of, the digital revolution, 40 years in, our answer is pretty ambivalent. On which basis, we might really say, all right, let's just like, let's pause and let's think this through. Now, as I said in my initial comments, I don't know how that pause would work. I don't know what the mechanism of that pause might be. Maybe there is no, plausible way of stopping or slowing this down. I have this sort of fear, right, that maybe there's literally nothing to be done. We just have to sort of ride the tiger and see what happens. But I have to say, speaking for myself, I wish there were a mechanism. Right?
Okay, out of respect for our presenters' time,
All right.
I want to close here, but I really, really appreciate you coming this evening and giving your talks. It's been a pleasure to listen to you. And I think I speak for the audience as well.
Yeah. All right. I guess we'll see each other tomorrow.
Sounds good. Yeah.
It was remarkable hearing such contrasting views offered with such collegiality. That's the way universities should roll.
Work.
Yeah. So thank you all. Thank you, HGAPS. Thank you, everyone who made this possible. Run, be free.